He said, I want you to tape her hands. I begged him not to do it.
I've been prosecuting murderers for 15 years.
This is a really terrible, heinous crime.
I've never lost a homicide case.
Guy's gonna die in the electric chair.
My job is to fight for justice.
I don't believe Coleman got a fair trial, and he had an alibi.
I've been defending the accused for over 20 years.
Mother Teresa and the Pope got involved in the case.
Ensuring the innocent don't serve time for someone else's crime.
I'm not guilty, Your Honor.
For true justice to be served,
We need to answer one single question.
Nestled in an Appalachian hollow is the tight-knit, hardscrabble town of Grundy, Virginia. In the early 1980s, it's a place where the men have one clear career path, and that's following their kin deep down into the local coal mines. Yes, the work is good, but for guys like Brad McCoy, at the end of the late shift, you're dog-tired and ready to go home. In his case, that means to his wife of 3 years, Wanda.
He didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but when he went through the door, the first thing he noticed was the TV was on.
Honey?
The rug was pushed back, and the coffee table was pushed to one side. He called out for his wife.
Wanda?
His wife did not answer.
Wanda?
He became alarmed. He checked the bedroom.
Wanda?
It was a horrible crime. He just was hysterical. He ran his father's house. Brad's father called us.
Grundy police logged the call at 11:21 p.m. Within minutes, Detective Jack Davidson is at the scene taking charge.
I spoke with the officers that initially responded to the scene to find out what has actually happened. I then went inside the residence to see for myself. I was very cautious because I really didn't know what we'd find.
I went into the living room and could tell that the furniture was pushed around and out of the ordinary. There was some blood in the living room, up on the wall, like there was a struggle.
There was fluid on the floor and it feathered out towards the hallway. You could see that the victim had been dragged from the living room back into the bedroom.
What they find in the bedroom is a scene from a horror film.
She was killed there in the bedroom. You could tell that it had just happened because of the fresh blood still on the floor.
The victim, Wanda McCoy, her throat had been cut to a point of almost decapitating her. Based upon her positioning of her clothes and everything else, it appeared that she may have been raped.
the horror she endured is immeasurable. But when examining a murder scene, you have to set your emotions aside and take all of it in. It's the only way you're going to find the key piece of evidence to get the person who did this and put them behind bars where they belong.
The whole forensics team took swabs. They like the blood splatter marks on the wall and the black substance on her body. They combed her pubic hair and found a fawn hair. 2 or 3 of her fingers were cut. And I think that she grabbed the knife as an effort to defend herself. And the blood landed on the wall from that. We noticed a black substance between her legs, and her hands were black, as if they had coal dirt or coal dust on them.
Coal dust points the finger at this being one of Grundy's own. But in a town where bloodlines run thick, who could do such a thing?
You could visibly see 3 stab wounds in her chest. If I cut your throat, I pretty well killed you. The stab wounds in your chest, it tells you that they're in a rage.
We searched the house to see how he got in. The only entrance and exit I could find was the front door. There was an impression against the molding of the door, but it didn't appear sufficient for the purpose of prying that door open. There was a pane of glass. It had been painted over, and it had a sort of a peephole where they could look out and see who's outside.
It's an unusual feature, but it makes perfect sense if you knew Wanda McCoy.
Wanda's a very shy individual and wouldn't allow strangers to come in their house. She had to allow that individual to come inside. It had to be somebody she knew quite well.
It just went like wildfire. Then everybody was pointing fingers at everybody, and everybody in the community was talking about it.
I was stunned that Wanda had been killed. It really rocked the town. I think they were scared, very scared.
The love story that is Wanda and Brad dates back to when the two were still in high school.
Wanda was a classmate of mine at Grundy Senior High School. She was kind, she was gentle, and she always had a smile on her face. Brad would come up during his lunch break and have lunch with Wanda. They were always together. They were a pair.
They're in love, and that's all that matters. So even before she graduates, Brad and Wanda get married.
Brad had a good job at a mining supply company, and Wanda was very content being a housewife. They loved each other and never bothered anyone.
It's a sad fact. When a woman is killed, the killer is often the man in her life. So the first person of interest here has got to be Wanda's husband, Brad. Where was he at the time she was killed?
So how did you and your wife get along? Any troubles at home at all?
I questioned him in regards to what transpired and if there was any problem between him and Wanda.
We didn't have any problems. We were happy.
And he was extremely distraught in regards to what had taken place and what he had seen. I knew there was a struggle that ensued there in the house. I was looking for any claw marks. I didn't see anything.
Brad has a rock-solid alibi, too. He clocked out from the mine at 11 p.m. There's no possible way he gets home before his wife, Wanda, is killed.
There was just no way Brad could have done it.
Punching the clock might have saved this guy from a death sentence. They're going to have to find some other likely suspect. And with a panicked town breathing down your neck, the pressure's really on.
So if not Brad, then who? It's got to be someone Wanda knew well. Chief Jackson learns Wanda had been getting obscene phone calls. The Grundy rumor mill throws up a name, Danny Ray, her sister's ex.
Jack and I went to a mine site where Danny Ray was working at and interviewed him.
Danny was family. He'd have no problem getting Wanda to open the door.
The owner of the mines produced records showing that Danny Ray was working at the time that this murder had taken place. We eliminated him pretty soon.
That's when Brad comes forward with another name familiar to the family. And this one gives investigators their first major break.
He said, well, she's got a sister that lives just down the road.
Who's that? Trish.
I said, well, is she married?
Yes, she's married to Roger Coleman.
No one has a bad word to say about shy and quiet 19-year-old Wanda McCoy. So when she's discovered in a pool of blood in her Grundy, Virginia home, detectives are under the gun to solve the case. News that she's related to local sex offender Roger Coleman is the break they've been waiting for.
I have to say that as soon as I was told that Wanda's sister was married to Roger Coleman, I thought, well, he could very well be a likely candidate.
Coleman's unhealthy sexual appetites have been getting him in trouble since he was a teen.
Jack and I both was aware of several run-ins with the law in the past. He did make some inappropriate phone calls to several of the cheerleaders at the senior high school. He was placed on probation. I had also investigated Roger on 2 other occasions. One of them was an attempted rape.
Coleman knocked on the door of schoolteacher Brenda Ratliff, who was home alone with her daughter. In a heartbeat, he reveals his dark side.
I said, just take anything you want. He said, I want you to tape her hands and feet. Then I begged him not to make me do it. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. And I was just crying uncontrollably. He turned me and he said, now let's go upstairs. And I can remember thinking, God, I always wondered when I was going to die, and I know it's today. He threw me down on the bed, and he undid the zipper. And I just kept fighting the entire time. And I said to myself, I cannot let him do this. So I scratched his neck. And he said, now you've made me mad. And when he got off me, I ran down the stairs. I was screaming. I heard neighbors say, we're coming, we're coming. And the boy ran off.
Determined to catch the monster who attacked her, Brenda manages to ID Coleman from a school yearbook, which gets him 20 months in jail for attempted rape.
He always denied that. He said that it wasn't him, that it was somebody else.
Roger Coleman is not just any neighborhood bad boy. He's someone who's really got to be looked at. I've seen a lot of rapists and killers. They often get more dangerous with time. Coleman started off with obscene calls. Has he graduated to rape and murder?
After serving his time, Coleman appears to be following the straight and narrow. He gets a job digging coal and begins dating Wanda's younger sister, Trish. It's a whirlwind romance, and within months, they tie the knot.
Roger Coleman was very intelligent, very intense. He also seemed to be a loner. I think a lot of people didn't understand him, and he didn't understand them. And deep in my mind, I thought, well, I hope that he's not the suspect merely because of the crime he committed earlier.
The prior attempted rape conviction, everybody knew him from that. You know, everybody kind of wondered about him.
But this leopard hasn't changed his spots. One winter's evening in January 1981, Pat Hatfield is working alone at the local library.
It was about 10 minutes till closing. Saw someone coming through the doors. Didn't recognize the face, and he had his pants unzipped. And he was masturbating. He has this dead, cold stare. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. It's a dead look. It's a very dead look. That was frightening. I couldn't identify who it was because I had never seen this person before. But I was concerned because this person clearly had a malevolent look.
Working with a sketch artist, Pat is able to describe the man cops know well.
And they said to me, "What you're describing really sounds like Roger Coleman." I made a trip to the high school and I asked to see a picture of Roger. There was a basketball picture. And the minute I saw that, I said, that's the man. That's him.
It's a long way from shocking librarians to slashing your sister-in-law's throat. But Coleman's got a bad reputation, and that means that everything he did to earn that reputation is going to reinforce the investigators' belief that they've got their man. This is where things get dangerous for innocent people with embarrassing pasts. No matter how much you've changed, you're always under suspicion.
And that means investigators need to pay Roger Coleman a visit.
I was looking for any claw marks or where she may have scratched him with her fingernails. I didn't see anything.
Coleman could not be more helpful. Blood samples, hair samples, work clothes, no problem.
Coleman would be within his rights to refuse to give anything to the investigators without a court order, but Coleman is totally cooperative. That's not what you do if you've got something to hide.
And there's no getting away from a rock-solid alibi.
Roger's story was that he had left for work between 8 and 8:30. When he got to the mines, there was equipment tore up, so they couldn't work that night. He left the mine about 10. And went to this bathhouse that had 3 or 4 showers fixed in the basement. After they got off from work, they could come and use that basement to shower in. He'd run into Philip Van Dyke, a mechanic at one of the processing plants, and he talked to him for about a half an hour or so, till about 10:30. Coleman then went to Boyd's trailer park up on Slate Creek and had talked to a husband and wife,
Roger.
the Stiltner family,
Here to get my tape. We have Roger's tape?
and left at 10:45.
Roger? Thank you.
Coleman said he got home just after 11.
I asked his wife, and she said he came home at 11:05.
Defenders dream of airtight alibis, proof that your client was somewhere else when the crime occurred. The medical examiner says Wanda McCoy died 10 or 15 minutes after 11. That's not a big window. And when you look through it, you don't see Roger Coleman. He was at home.
Was there enough time for him to drive to Boyd's trailer park and then from Boyd's back to Brad's house, commit the rape, and then take a shower, and then go on to the house and arrive there at the house either between 11:05 or 11:30. So there was some questions in regards to that.
It's an alibi investigators don't buy. They believe Coleman killed his sister-in-law, Wanda McCoy. But can they find the evidence to prove it? In small-town Virginia, police are homing in on convicted sexual deviant Roger Coleman for the murder of his sister-in-law, Wanda McCoy. He's saying he's innocent, but 4 weeks after the murder, the blood type results suggest a different story.
The person that raped Ms. McCoy had B-type blood. Only about 10% of the population at that time had B-type blood, and Mr. Coleman had B-type blood. The victim had O-type blood. There were several spots of O-type blood found on Mr. Coleman's blue jeans that he had on the night in question.
It's not solid proof, but the blood type matches reveal there's a good chance they've got the right man. And the pubic hair found on Wanda, the one that didn't belong to her or her husband, that looks promising too.
Hair is like a snowflake, no two are the same, but they compare the hairs microscopically, and they're either similar or consistent with, or they're dissimilar altogether. The microscopic comparison are based on race, texture, color, and those types of things, so we know that. The victim was red-headed. Her husband had blonde hair. There was a dark brown pubic hair that was identified at the state crime lab as being consistent with Mr. Coleman's.
Everything was pointing towards Roger. The blood and the hair and being in the area at the time and being probably the only individual other than maybe Brad that Wanda would allowed into the house. Somebody had to get inside that house without forcing their way into it.
The pieces of evidence are stacking up to convince investigators they have the right guy.
Make no mistake, the strongest evidence against Roger Coleman is his bad reputation. He just seems like he'd do something like that. But you can't try people based on what they seem like.
Taken together with the circumstances of the crime, you have enough to charge him.
A month after Wanda's young life was brutally snuffed out, Coleman is arrested and charged with her rape and capital murder. For police in Grundy, a dangerous sex killer is off the streets, and it's all but case closed.
I was shocked when I heard he was arrested. Could he have done this to his sister-in-law? Someone that his wife loved dearly.
One person reckons he knows exactly what happened. Coleman's cellmate.
Roger Matney informed law enforcement officials that Roger Coleman had confessed to the murder and the rape of Wanda McCoy and had described a sanitary napkin that was in the bedroom that had you not been in the bedroom, you would not have known about.
12 months after the slaying, Roger Coleman's trial opens amid a frenzy of expectation. Grundy's townsfolk are certain he's guilty. If the jury agrees, he's destined to die in the chair.
Most people in death cases get terrible lawyers who don't know what they're doing, who've never tried a death case before. Or they get a lawyer who's a public defender who's got 300 other cases and can't spend the time on the case. Roger Coleman had terrible representation.
The prosecution's case is this. Wanda knew the man that raped and killed her. Her brother-in-law, Roger Coleman, is a convicted sex offender. It's true that the blood type matches don't point to a specific individual, but taken together, all this tells a story.
For the prosecution's story to hold up, their first job is to drill holes in Coleman's supposedly airtight alibi.
Roger Coleman says he left the Stiltoners at 10:45, but the Stiltoners say he left around 10:20.
Even Coleman's grandmother turns against him, blowing another gaping hole in his alibi.
Coleman says he arrived home at about 5 after 11. But his grandmother said he got home as the 11 o'clock news was going off at 11:30.
So, Coleman waves goodbye to the Stillmans at 10:20 p.m. and gets home to Grandma at 11:30 p.m. That's a window of around 50 minutes to rape and kill Wanda. Easily enough time.
Roger kept trying to finagle the times to show that he didn't have enough time, and we kept saying, yes, you did, Roger. He kept saying he left at 10:45, and his grandmother says he got home at 11:30. You know, so that would have given him another 25 minutes to have carried out the crime.
It's looking like Coleman's goose is thoroughly cooked. But the trouble is, the rest of the prosecution case, starting with the forensics, doesn't hold up so well.
Let's get real for just a minute here on what's science and what's mumbo jumbo. Hair matches? Mumbo jumbo.
25 years ago, hair testing was nonsense. It was somebody looking at a hair under a microscope and saying, yeah, it looks like that hair.
Let's remember that in 1981, there was no such thing as a DNA match. What they do have is pretty rudimentary. Hair sample match? That'll narrow your suspects down to maybe 10 or 20 million. Blood type O? That's half the country. Type B? That's another 20 million. Even in a town as small as Grundy, you'd have dozens of matches. The one reliable thing they have back then? Fingerprints. But we're not hearing a thing about them.
That's another one of those pieces of evidence that doesn't quite fit into this theory that Coleman did it. There's so many cases like this where it becomes a question of tunnel vision, that I focused on my suspect, now I know who it is, I'm going to prove that that person's guilty.
All along, the cops have been saying Wanda must have known her killer because there was no sign of a break-in. But there was a pry mark on the front door.
It was noted in the detective's report the very first night, but was not actually disclosed to the defense prior to the trial.
So maybe Wanda's killer was a stranger. And that's not all. Coleman's jailhouse confession is thrown into doubt when inmates testify that his cellmate is a hardcore liar who would sell his own mother to get his sentence reduced.
Isn't it true that everything you're saying is a bunch of lies?
Nope, he told me everything. He did it all.
The only thing they've got is that they figure Wanda had to have let the guy in. Now, it turns out that's not even so. The prosecution has hidden away the fact that it does look like the door might have been forced open after all. You can't send a guy to the chair on a bad reputation, pseudoscience, and coincidence. That's not justice.
When the jury files out to consider their verdict, tension runs sky high. Will they find Robert Coleman guilty or innocent of the rape and murder of Wanda McCoy? In March 1982, there's only one thing the people of Grundy, Virginia can think about: the trial of Roger Coleman for the murder of his sister-in-law, Wanda. For 2 days, jurors sift through the conflicting evidence.
I felt like in my mind that the case was strong enough that Roger Coleman would be found guilty of the capital murder charge and of the rape
Finally, there's a decision.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Roger Coleman, guilty of the count of rape and first-degree murder.
Guilty of rape and capital murder. Roger Coleman is sentenced to die in the electric chair.
This is a travesty, and it brings up a huge issue. Any experienced lawyer would have shredded the prosecution's case. But Coleman's attorney was a rookie, and he didn't have the experience to take on the resources of the state of Virginia.
You can't ask for science that didn't exist at the time. You can ask for a fair jury, and he had one. For them, Wanda McCoy's family, and the people of Grundy, there is no doubt. Justice is served. A violent predator is taken off the street, and he won't be coming back.
I don't believe Coleman got a fair trial. There was no specific physical evidence. There was no fingerprint. There was no DNA. There was none of that at the time.
If you do not know 100% that someone is guilty of a crime, I would have found it very hard to impose a death sentence on someone.
Coleman takes his place on death row, where he claims to find God.
You're pretty much focused on end things. And I think that tends to make people turn toward religion.
Coleman's newfound faith energizes him, and he vows to prove his innocence to the world.
I went to go talk to Phil Van Dyke till about 10:30.
He grabs the attention of not one, but two prestigious law firms who agree to take on his case pro bono.
Luckily for Coleman, there are people who care about injustice and are willing to fight it. People sometimes scoff at them as bleeding heart do-gooders, but working to fix the mistakes our system makes, I think that's the mark of someone who wants it to work.
There were a lot of people who thought that Roger Coleman was innocent or could be innocent and worked hard behind the scenes to see if he could get a new trial.
Just because we had had a trial and had a conviction, it seemed like the investigation didn't end. These people were offering rewards of anybody that had information concerning the Roger Coleman case. These people were calling and making accusations.
Coleman's new hotshot lawyers leave no stone unturned. They re-examine every shred of evidence and re-interview every single witness, leading them to a startling conclusion.
The evidence only made sense if there were two perpetrators. The biological evidence showed that the semen bore markers of two different men. The fact that everybody saw Coleman by himself that night is powerful evidence that he did not have an accomplice. So he probably didn't do it.
Another breakthrough for the defense team comes in the shape of a mysterious phone call.
Hello?
A woman phoned and said that she had been sexually assaulted by a man who said to her, "Shut up or I'll do you like I did that girl in Slate Creek."
Okay.
Coleman's lawyers are thrilled. This could be the key to opening Roger's death row door. Once they make the recording public, other women come forward, all of them saying they've been molested by the same man. Even better, this guy has a brother, so this may well be the two-man team they're searching for. Confident that Coleman will soon be strolling out of the prison gates, his lawyers lodge another appeal.
Executing somebody has zero chance of rehabilitating them. And with all the appeals in process, it doesn't save the state any money. So why do it? It's theater, it's a show. In the Coleman case, it looks to all the world like the state of Virginia is willing to bend the rules of evidence and justice to kill a man. To anyone who cares about our justice system, that's a big problem.
A new hearing to rehear the same old stuff? To what end? All these so-called doubts were laid to rest long ago. There's nothing new in them. Coleman's death sentence is unanimously affirmed by the Virginia Supreme Court. You know what would be new? Coleman saying, "I did it, I'm sorry."
To convince courts is not so easy, especially without DNA evidence. You have very powerful forces trying to prevent it. The prosecution, they think they're right. The police think they got the investigation right. And the victim's family doesn't want to do it. It's terrible for them to have to go through it twice.
The new evidence cuts no ice with the state of Virginia. His appeal is denied.
I've interviewed the so-called suspects, going back again, and re-interview people, and there was nothing there. Yes, I've had people say, "Oh, yes, he said this." Well, who did he say in the presence of? Because you're the one that's calling in.
But Coleman soldiers on.
He knew time was drawing near, and he was all full out in the mode to get his case out before the public.
Roger Keith Coleman was a master manipulator. He got, the press, the publication, all this painted the area as an ignorant backwoods people, and they didn't know much of anything. And they assumed that there's no way that they'd come out with a fair verdict, because here we have this individual on death row, and he's getting ready to be put to death. And you got these ignorant back here, ignorant people that wants a sacrificial lamb.
After 8 long years battling Coleman's execution, his lawyers decide to harness the newly available forensic science, DNA testing. They discover that of the 2 semen samples, one belongs to Wanda's husband, which means the second sample must belong to Wanda's killer.
DNA science wasn't as advanced back then as it is today. It couldn't identify a particular person, but it could possibly rule Coleman out, so of course running it makes sense. But it does not rule him out. So as far as the state of Virginia is concerned, the jury's verdict stands. Coleman is guilty, and his time is running out.
10 years after his conviction, a date is finally set to execute Roger Coleman. His defenders around the world go into overdrive, whipping up public support against what they claim is a terrible miscarriage of justice.
It takes a long time to execute a death row prisoner because of the appeals. The reality is, the review that they get on those appeals is perfunctory. And not only perfunctory, but can be aggressively pitched against them. There are very few courts that are actively looking at these cases to say, is this correct?
This case attracted more attention than I've experienced in my 37-year career of practicing law. The Pope got involved in the case. Mother Teresa got involved in this case. Accounts were published in Time and Newsweek and creating doubt and suspicion on the conviction.
Coleman maintained his innocence across the board to everyone he spoke to.
I'm innocent, I didn't commit this crime, and I'm not going to let them murder me without putting up a fight to prove my innocence.
In a last-ditch attempt to save Coleman's skin, his defense team persuade the governor of Virginia to allow him to take a polygraph just 24 hours before he's set to die.
They call them lie detectors, but that's not what they do. They measure stress on the discredited theory that there's some link between stress and lying. Being a day away from execution, that's stressful too.
Have you ever had sex with Wanda McCoy?
Regarding the death of Wanda McCoy, did you yourself inflict any of those fatal wounds? No.
It's 24 hours before Roger Coleman's date with the electric chair, and a family friend anxiously awaits the result of his polygraph test, which could help prove his innocence.
I had been selected by the Virginia Press Association to witness the execution. Virginia law requires journalists to be in there. As the time grew near and the media frenzy intensified around the nation, around the world, I kept thinking, I'm going to watch a man die in the electric chair. And I thought, can I do this? Am I going to be able to do this? On the way up to the execution, I prayed, God, if there's a sign that Roger Coleman is indeed guilty, please let me see that sign. And the newscast comes on the radio, and the governor had issued an order to give him a lie detector test, and then the announcer said, and he failed. Well, I took that as a sign. It was a sign that I needed.
The polygraph test result only adds additional confirmation that Roger Coleman is the one who killed Wanda McCoy. It's another brick in the wall.
With just minutes remaining till the execution, news crews and death penalty protesters jostle outside the prison.
An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. I hope Americans will realize the injustices of the death penalty.
Kathy Still has a ringside seat.
They try to prepare you for what you're going to see. I can tell you it does not prepare you in the least bit. The team comes in. Roger walked directly to the chair. The team quickly strapped him in, and they were very somber. I felt very, very warm, not in a good way. And I think the other people in the room, they felt the same way. Nobody said a word. And then just in a matter of seconds, you hear a buzz. A humming noise. There's a jolt in the chair. He's strapped in, so very little moves, but the hands. It seemed like so much longer than it actually was. You have to wait before this person is pronounced dead. I thought, I've just watched someone die. I've watched someone be executed. I also thought of Wanda and Brad and her family and the town of Grundy and what everyone had been through because of an act that Roger Coleman did.
Coleman may be dead, but the fight to clear his name lives on. Fast forward 14 years, and DNA science has advanced to the point where it could finally answer the question, did Roger Coleman do it?
In 2006, our governor at the time struck an agreement to have the semen samples that were retained for all those years independently analyzed to see whether or not Coleman's DNA matched the DNA in the semen sample.
I was a bureau reporter. I had my own office in another area. So I'm sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting for the email to come in. I have a lot of time to think, and a lot of things are going through my head. Did I watch an innocent man die? To know that I saw someone innocent be put to death by the state would have been something I'm not sure I could have handled.
Coleman's lawyers have spent 20 years fighting to prove that Roger Coleman is innocent. Paul and Zena and Jim McCloskey are a phone call away from finding out the truth.
I was representing Centurion in their efforts to get the testing. It was a very strange atmosphere before the news came through. The phone rang, and Jim picked it up, and it was the lab calling.
Jim McCloskey. Yes, sir.
And I'll never forget what he said.
I'm sorry, say that again? He is the source.
It's a match.
1 in 19 million.
So we knew right away that it had come back and matched Coleman.
All right, bye.
He was guilty.
He's guilty.
By that point, Jim has been working on the case for almost 20 years. I think he had to be terribly disappointed.
Man, boy.
Not only because the results came back the way they did, but because he had been misled by someone who he came to care about. You know, I think that had to be very hard for him.
I always believed that Roger was completely innocent. I now know that I was wrong.
I felt very disappointed.
I felt vindicated, but not just myself. I felt our community was vindicated because the media had done such a hatchet job on the prosecution in the case. I never expected that the DNA test results would indicate anything other than Mr. Coleman.
I think in the end, justice was done, and I was extremely relieved that the DNA test was conclusive.
Roger Coleman pulled the wool over the eyes of a lot of very smart people, from really clever lawyers to journalists around the world. This guy was a sociopath, a master manipulator. Coleman deserved to be punished.
Had he gotten away with this murder, then it is likely other women would have suffered or died at his hands. Coleman's execution? Everyone has their own view about that. For me, the goal is to keep the community safe from people like him. That's a good end, and the right one.